Hi and welcome to Bleeding Tree Gaming. My name's Amy, aka Warpfiend, and in this episode I'm going to be painting up a Kasa-obake, a Japanese umbrella spirit. Now this is from Bad Squiddo Games, and he commissioned me to paint up this one, and it's a super cute model. I really love it, so I'm going to show you how I paint it. The first stage of this is really just going to be sketching and getting some colours down and some kind of general idea with what I want to do with the piece. I start with some African shadow on the arms and the leg. This is going to be the base for the skin. Next I take some Payne's Grey from Pro Acryl, and I'm just going to base the tongue and the mouth. Next I'm going to take some Scrag Brown and I'm going to paint what is going to be the yellow stripe of this umbrella. I had a little reference image that I was working off, and while I didn't decide to go with the freehand kind of floral design, I am going to give this some red and yellow stripes. So then I move on to blood red, and I'm going to get in the reds. You'll notice I'm working wet on wet because I'm going very fast in this sketch, so the line between them is going to be blurred, but I want to sketch out just the beginnings of a line. This is a thing when you're doing freehand with straight lines. Don't expect to get it right the first time, but I'm going to keep on pushing backwards and forwards, and eventually it'll be a nice smooth line. Next I mix some beige red into that base tone of the African shadow, and I'm just going to throw like a really basic highlight onto the arms. I'm just trying to sketch out where the most light will be falling on it. Then I mix some of that beige red with some sunny skin tone, and I'm going to add an even higher highlight. Again, this is all just helping me to get an idea of where the light and the shadows are going to fall. I do want them quite striking on this skin. Finally, I'm going to take some Rhinox hide, and I'm just going to base the little wooden sandal that he's wearing. Once I've done this initial sketch, I'm going to let it dry and then come back to it, and I'm going to start refining areas. Now first of all, I'm using that African shadow on the red parts of the umbrella. I'm just kind of refining the shadows with them. That's what I'm going to be doing first. I'm going to be shading down, and first I use this African shadow, and then I move to the Payne's Grey again. I'm going to try and be much thinner lines this time, just keeping it inside the lines of that African shadow I've already used. Okay, having shaded down, we're going to highlight up. I'm going to start with Antares red, and I'm going to just be drawing lines up and down because I want to suggest the texture of how an umbrella would be. There's loads of slats sticking down. These initial lines are going to be very rough. They're going to be quite wide, and that's okay because what we do is we keep on making the lines smaller every time we highlight. At the same time I'm using that Antares red, I'll also be jumping back to the Scrag Brown to kind of neaten up that line and the definition between the two sections. And I want to make sure that the line is perfectly even all the way around the model. You can see it still looks very messy at this stage, and this is one of those things like people need to get over. Like at stages in your painting, a model will look bad, and like the more you're willing to risk a model looking bad to get to where your ultimate vision is, like the further you can push it. Now I'm going to bring in some Avalon Sunset. You can see I'm using it to define the edges of the yellow section again, and then I'm going for those vertical lines that's going to form the texture of the piece. I'm going to add some sunny skin tone into my Antares red, and and I'm going to continue highlighting, getting those lines slightly smaller, being more precise every time I pass. And you can see already there's a lot less of that mess there, and there's a lot more definition coming in. After I've done a first pass of that, I'm going to mix slightly more of that sunny skin tone into my Antares red to get it lighter, and eventually do a pass of pure sunny skin tone. I'm just brightening up all of those highlights, making it sharper, and we're going to take those highlights all the way up to dark ivory, really bright. But the effect this is having is desaturating it, so the next thing we need to do is we need to glaze it to bring some of that vibrancy back in. I start the glazes with some ball red. Now this colour is nice and bright, and it's good for the highlights and building up a depth of red, but I decide that this isn't dark enough and deep enough red. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to then move on to some Flesh Tearers red. Now this colour is going to really bring that vibrancy back in. So now I'm going to do the steps I just did with the red with the yellow. I start with some highlighting some vertical lines up and down it with some Avalon Sunset, and I'm also going to use horizontal lines to sharpen up the edges of the yellow, much like I did with the edges of the red. And I gradually mix in some dark ivory to that yellow, in the process again, just thinner and thinner edge highlights. Every pass you're doing, you're trying to go thinner and thinner and define it more and more. And I'm going to bring the vibrancy back in the yellow section by using some Iandin Yellow contrast paint. I've mostly been using these unthinned. I tend with contrast paints, if I do want to thin them, I put them on the model and then maybe add some water as I'm going. And you can see I'm just highlighting back up the red parts now. And a lot of what this process is going to be is doing the highlights, then doing the glazes to bring the vibrancy back in. And I think I do this 3 times in total, and every time those highlights are a little bit sharper and a little bit finer. You can see I go back to that Payne's grey and I'm just refining those edges. And I take some black acrylic ink and I'm going to do a very fine line to just really separate the red and the yellow sections. Now I'm going to start highlighting up the skin. I take that mix of African shadow and beige red and just give the skin a regular volumetric highlight, just paying attention to where light's hitting and using my light sketch that I put down earlier as kind of a guide. At the same time I'm further refining it and just trying to be a bit more precise. I then highlight up that skin by going to the pure beige red, and then I mix in some sunny skin tone, and finally I mix in some of the dark ivory. and I'm just going to gradually refine those highlights until we have something like this. Now it looks alright, but there's not enough colour in it, so we'll come back to that later. While I've got the dark ivory out, I'm just going to use it to base the eyeball. Right, now to add some colour to this, the very highlights I'm going to use some Vallejo yellow green, and I love this colour because on top of the purple base tones we've got going in the skin, this is going to create a kind of lurid-y, sickly effect that's just like a little bit creepy. And what I'm doing is I'm actually just dotting some on in areas where I want there to be highlights, because I want to create a kind of knoll texture to the skin. And I gradually mix in some dark ivory with that to just bring it up to a very high highlight. After I've done that, I'm mixing some royal purple with that African shadow, just to get a bit more colour in the shadows. And I'm just going to do the same kind of dotting, stippling effect, just reinforce some of those shadows. I take that same mix of royal purple and African shadow, and I'm going to use it to highlight the tongue. I'm going to do almost all of it on the first pass with this, just leaving some of it in the very shadows that's the Payne's Grey. And I mix in some of that beige red with the purple mix that I've got. Now this is complex here because I'm just using one mix here for the whole thing, and I gradually lighten it. After I've added the beige red, I'm going to start adding some of the dark ivory in to highlight that up. And I do it in a few stages, and I think this is a really good way of painting sometimes. Just use the same mix on your palette and just mix different paints into it to highlight it to different levels. And it's a fairly quick way of working, but like the use of repeated colours from other parts of the palette will really kind of tie these little details in with the rest of it that you're working on. I'm going to highlight up the eye by mixing some white blue into the dark ivory, and then some pure white blue just on the very highest parts of the eyeball. Then I shade it down by mixing some Payne's Grey into the dark ivory, and then just mix a little bit more Payne's Grey and get it quite dark underneath. That mix of Payne's Grey and dark ivory I'm just going to use on the claws, his fingernails, and also the strap on his sandals. Then I take some Scrag Brown and I'm going to use it for all the blood vessels in the eyes. I'm going to base the iris of the eye in some dark ivory. Already dropped a dot of black into the center of that, and then I'm going to come in with some striking scorpion green and just hit that eyeball. Now a lot of these things I'm going to give some very simple highlights, like the green I just literally add a little bit of dark ivory. The blood vessels, I first mix some Antares red and some of that sunny skin tone and highlight that up to pure sunny skin tone, just with some little dots here and there on the blood vessels. I'm going to use the dark ivory to hit all the edges of the tongue, and I do the lines down the middle as well. I take the Scrag Brown and I'm going to start drawing lines on the sandals to try and create that wood texture effect. And I'm going to mix some sunny skin tone into the Scrag Brown and highlight up with that. And then the final one on these is just some of that dark ivory on the corners, and just hitting the corners of these simple horizontal lines on here will really kind of sharpen them up and give you like a realistic wood looking sandal. I use those same colours to highlight the little wooden knob on the top. Now I'm going to take him off the base. Oh dear, I might have super glued him a bit too much. Let's just carefully get this knife. No, I said carefully. Oh well. The Kasa-obake has taken its blood toll, I guess. But I managed to get him off. Let's glue him to the base that I've prepared earlier. I swear I didn't get any of this blood on him. I wrapped up my finger well. And there he is. Right, well this has been a great project. I really enjoyed working on this one. It's so cool. This lovely little umbrella man. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye bye.